Welcome to another deep dive. Today, in this explainer, we're unpacking the source material on an absolute giant, a giant that quietly controls massive chunks of our digital world. When we think of the world's most valuable tech companies, we immediately think of Apple, Microsoft, maybe Google, right? But there's an invisible giant sitting right alongside them, one operating almost entirely from the shadows. And get this, it's worth more than Samsung or MasterCard. Today, we're unmasking Tencent. Okay, let's dive right into this. It really reads like a geopolitical thriller. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the invisible tech giant, look at the rise of the copycat, explore the Everything app, discuss the CCP connection, map out how they're buying the world, and finally look at the tech crackdown. Section 1. The invisible tech giant, the octopus in your pocket. So officially, Tencent's corporate mascot is this really finely, completely harmless-looking little penguin. But looking at the source material, a far more accurate mascot would be a giant octopus, one with these massive tentacles just quietly reaching into practically every single digital industry you can possibly think of all over the globe. So to really grasp the scale of this octopus, ask yourself, who actually owns your favorite apps and games? Because even if the name Tencent isn't a household name for you, you're almost certainly using their products every single day. Check this out. Tencent has a massive hand in almost all of these huge Western properties. They own literally 100% of Riot Games, the makers of League of Legends. They own a massive 40% stake in Epic Games, the creators of Fortnite, and they haven't stopped there. They've poured heavy investments into Discord, Reddit, Spotify, Snapchat. They even hold a stake in Tesla. It's kind of mind-blowing, right? They are everywhere, just quietly pulling the strings as this massive underlying force. Section 2. Rise of the copycat. From OICQ to dominance. To understand how they actually built this crazy empire, we have to rewind to some incredibly humble and, frankly, unapologetically unoriginal beginnings. Back in 1998, founder Pony Ma and his friends launched OICQ. And, well, it was a blatant, literal clone of an Israeli chat program called ICQ. They basically just slapped an O on the front and called it a day. They actually almost went bankrupt. But in 2000, they scored a lifeline, a $2.2 million venture capital injection that helped them survive the dot-com crash. They rebranded to QQ, and in 2003, they hit an absolute goldmine. They added something called QQ Show, where they sold virtual clothing for user avatars. Just pennies per item, but it added up to millions of dollars. And then, astonishingly, by 2005, this scrappy little startup had completely defeated Microsoft's MSN Messenger in China. How? Well, Microsoft was slow and bureaucratic, constantly waiting on approvals from the US. Tencent, on the other hand, was coding new features in real time, moving incredibly fast. Now, what's really interesting about this strategy is perfectly summed up by Pony Ma himself. He famously said, "I don't blindly innovate. The smartest approach is to learn from the best examples and then try to surpass them." So they didn't have a giant R&D department trying to reinvent the wheel. Nope. They just watched what worked globally, copied it exactly, and then iterated on it at lightning speed for the Chinese market. It was essentially a strategy of blatant plagiarism. But you know what? It built them an absolutely unstoppable foundation. Section 3. The Everything app. One app to rule them all. While QQ made them a dominant force on desktop computers, Pony Ma saw the smartphone revolution coming a mile away, and that spurred the creation of WeChat. Now, the digital ecosystems that emerged in the West versus China, they just couldn't be more different. In the West, our app experience is super fragmented. I mean, if you want to chat, you open WhatsApp. To pay a friend, you use PayPal. Need a ride? Open Uber. But over in China, Tencent pulled off the seemingly impossible, a true all-in-one ecosystem. They launched this revolutionary feature called mini programs, which essentially let WeChat bypass the Apple or Google app stores entirely. So now, tens of thousands of other businesses live directly inside WeChat. To really ground this, let's walk through a completely normal micro-moment for an average citizen in China. Step 1. You call your friend on WeChat to confirm dinner plans. Step 2. Without even leaving the app, you book your taxi through a WeChat mini program. Step 3. You arrive, take a quick photo for your WeChat social feed, and then you pay for the entire meal by scanning a code with WeChat Pay. You can even go ahead and book a movie ticket for afterward. The whole shebang, all without ever closing that single application. And all of that extreme convenience leads to this truly staggering statistic. 1.4 billion users spending an average of 4 hours every single day inside a single app. Let that sink in.
That is way more time than the average American spends on all of their social media platforms combined. It is literally vital for everyday survival in China. In fact, one executive compared having WeChat to having access to running water or electricity. It's that essential.
Section 4, the CCP connection, the price of convenience. So, this ultimate convenience, having every single aspect of your entire life tied to one digital profile, well, it comes with a very heavy price tag when it comes to privacy. The line between where Tencent ends and the Chinese Communist Party begins is, quite frankly, incredibly blurry by design. When Amnesty International did a comprehensive report rating how messaging apps handle user data and privacy, Tencent was the only company to score a literal 0 out of 100. 0. The source materials highlight a total lack of transparency, pointing out that Tencent doesn't even deny giving the Chinese government a backdoor to access all encrypting messages. So the crucial point is how this data is actually utilized. The source material outlines how Tencent feeds this massive wealth of user data straight into China's social credit system. This system aggregates pretty much everything, your payment history, your real-time location, even who your friends are, to rate a citizen's trustworthiness. If someone is blacklisted because of a low score, it leads to immediate, real-world consequences. We're talking things like being banned from buying a simple train ticket to travel. Furthermore, the sources detailed the stark reality of state surveillance. Private messages, images, everything sent through WeChat is constantly being scanned. The source shares this really chilling anecdote of a citizen who just made a lighthearted joke about a government official in a private text message, and shortly after, literally found himself sitting in a jail cell. The government has openly confirmed that they can access even deleted conversations, and they don't need any permission from courts or the users to do it. Section 5, Buying the World, the Global Octopus. Because Tencent had this total monopolistic cash cow running at home, they were able to go on an absolute global shopping spree. They operate almost like an unstoppable, limitless global venture capital fund. They figured out pretty quickly that buying minority or majority stakes in massive Western companies was a whole lot easier than trying to launch WeChat globally, especially since international users were, understandably, a bit wary of those surveillance ties. So they diversified. They bought massive chunks of the gaming industry, the music industry, and even dipped into the automotive sector. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of that success. Tencent's gaming revenue alone completely dwarfs the total revenues of both Nintendo and EA combined. Just wrap your head around that for a second. They are, without a doubt, the single largest gaming company on the planet. However, the sources note that this international reach has definitely brought some heavy scrutiny. There have been several instances where the CCP's political stances seem to directly influence Western corporate decisions through Tencent's involvement. For example, Tencent banned streaming NBA Houston Rockets games after a team manager tweeted in support of Hong Kong. A Tencent-backed gaming studio banned a player for endorsing pro-democracy protests. And researchers even found that international WeChat users, people completely outside of China, have their private messages censored if they mention taboo subjects like Tibet. It really highlights this very unique dynamic where massive global investments directly intersect with state policies. Section 6, the tech crackdown. The Empire Strikes Back. So, in a massive twist, it turns out the greatest existential threat to Tencent wasn't a rival tech company at all. It was the very government that enabled its rise in the first place. The Chinese government grew incredibly concerned that big tech companies had just grown way too powerful, that they were hoarding too much data and creating too much wealth inequality. So, almost overnight, regulators brought the hammer down with severe restrictions. New game licenses were completely frozen. They legally restricted kids under 18 to playing online games for just 3 hours a week total. Tencent was forced to heavily censor its own games. They famously had to rebrand a violent shooter into a patriotic title called Game for Peace, where characters literally wave goodbye instead of dying. And on top of all that, they were hit with massive billion-dollar anti-monopoly fines. The financial devastation of this crackdown was absolutely staggering. For Tencent alone, over $500 billion in market valuation was just completely wiped out. The CCP was sending a very, very clear message here. Absolutely no corporation, no matter how ridiculously wealthy or deeply ingrained in everyday life, is above the state. Let's move to and see how this builds into a massive ideological shift. A Chinese government publication actually went as far as to label online video games as spiritual opium. To appease the regulators and actually enforce these super strict new laws, Tencent had to integrate facial recognition technology directly into their games. They use police databases to actively scan players and automatically boot children offline the second their 3 hours are up. They basically had to bend entirely to the will of the state just to survive. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question. Can the ultimate tech monopoly survive its own government? Tencent built an absolute empire by mastering the rules of the game in China, taking a simple chat clone and turning it into the actual operating system of 1 billion people's lives. But as they try to walk this crazy tightrope, balancing appeasing the CCP with maintaining their massive global footprint, their future remains one of the most fascinating high-wire acts in modern business. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this helped you map out the unseen forces shaping our digital world. Keep questioning the tech you use every single day, and I'll see you in the next one.